My name is Mahlon Gibson. I was born between Farmington and Prairie Grove in a little community of Little Elm, or right across the street from the Little Elm Baptist Church. Well, of course, my mother and father lived on a farm. They were farmers. They went through hard times, very hard times, right after the Depression, and a lot of people know what they went through. But my dad was a pretty good leader in the community as far as helping people out and doing what he could. If someone got sick, he'd go milk their cows. But people did that back then. That was common practice. I went through the 8th grade at Bethel Grove School, which was just a small school there in the community. I went to high school then, to Farmington High School, my first 2 years. At the end of my second year, my parents decided that I might go for a higher education, so I moved up to Fayetteville High because they offered some courses that Farmington didn't offer at that time, like chemistry and some of those. So fortunately, we had a teacher at Fayetteville High that lived right near us, and so I rode back and forth to Fayetteville High School with that teacher. And then I graduated there in 1951. Well, my father, what led me to get my law degree, my father back at that time was a big quail hunter, and he had some real good friends in Fayetteville around the area that he hunted with, in fact kept and trained dogs for him. One of those was Rex Perkins, which was a pretty popular attorney here at that time, and he always kind of jokingly said, "I want you to go to school and come be a law partner for me," and I passed it off. But I did go seek court cases from time to time when I was in high school and when I was in college, and just kind of got interested in it. My service in the military, my first service was when I graduated from the university. I had gone through ROTC, and I was committed to 2 years active duty. But I was a little bit too young. You had to be 21, and when I graduated from university, I wasn't quite 21. I lacked a few months. But so I went into the Army and was stationed in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Well, yeah, Fort Huachuca. And after about my 8th month there, I got word that my father had passed away suddenly. Well, that left all the farming operation only to my mother, and with the help of some people locally here and a congressman or two, I was able to get an early discharge. Now, and later on then, after I was married, I was finishing up my my commitment to the service. I got called back in, and we went that time to Fort Hood, Texas for a year. Now, backing up just a little bit, before I was called to Fort Hood, Texas 2 or 3 years earlier, I had started a real estate business, and it was a good business. So that was my first venture really into business, was in real estate. But after I got called into service, it hurt my real estate business. So when I came back from that's when I began looking for something else. After law school, I went to work for Walter Niblock firm, and I tried several cases for Walter. I always told him he gave me some cases that he didn't think were very good to break me in on. But the funny part about it, the first 2 he gave me, one was a manslaughter case and one was a theft case. And I tried the manslaughter case in Bentonville, in Benton County Court, and I got a not guilty verdict. And I always thought that they just let the old boy go because he felt good for me. But my next case was a theft of property case here in Fayetteville that was given to me by Walter, and I got a not guilty verdict in that. And so those kind of got me fired up. I thought, well, if I can do this, I better stay with it.
So when did you decide to pursue the prosecutor's position? Talk about that, and then how the rest of your career, kind of how it proceeded.
Well, the prosecutor's situation came about. The state government divided the old original 4th Judicial District into two. They split Washington and Madison County off into one district, and they split Bentonville and Carroll County into the other district. So each district was going to require a prosecutor and a judge. So I thought that might be a good time to kind of get my feet wet, and I had a lot of encouragement from some members of the bar. They kind of got behind me, and so I decided that I'd take a shot at it. And I don't know, there were 4 or 5 of us ran for it, but fortunately I got elected, and that was my first encounter with the prosecutor's office.
So talk about what it was like when you were first a prosecutor. How many deputies did you have? What kind of caseload? Just kind of give me a rundown.
When I first elected prosecutor, there was a short period of time there that it was not a full-time job. The people in Little Rock had failed to break that up. So I was working part-time, still at Walter's office, but going over to the courthouse and being a prosecutor. But after about 4 or 5 months, they got that straightened out. And so I moved office over by the old courthouse. And the funny thing about it was, every morning when I would get ready to go to work, I'd stop by the jail. I had to walk right past it just to see what was going on. There might be one prisoner in there, there might be a couple, most times there wasn't anybody. Those days there just weren't too many criminals, and it's a good thing because we didn't have much jail to keep them in. But that's where I first got started, and it just kind of grew from there. The jail, that old jail building is still there in its original position, right just immediately south of the old courthouse. Well, there's one building in between. And that building in between at that time always used for a basketball gym and all sorts of things. And that's where my office was. And I had 2 little rooms in that office between the courthouse and the jail.
When you were prosecutor, who were the judges and the sheriff?
The judges were Judge Butt and Judge Cumming. They'd been there a long time.
So how long were you prosecutor, and then talk about your move into being a judge?
How long was I prosecutor? I believe for 8 years. I think it was 8 years. And when I first became prosecutor, I had no help at all. And I went to the university, and they had some boys or some people that were interested in perhaps following along that line, being attorneys and so forth. And I had 1 or 2 of them just come down to my office, and they worked for nothing, just for the experience. Kim Smith was the first one that I had. Kim showed up one morning. I had put the word out that I was looking for a assistant prosecutor, somebody that could work in the office. And Kim showed up, and I said, "Kim, I don't have any money. Don't know if we'll ever get any money." He said, I want to practice." And so that's how Kim and I got started. And I got him a little money. Wasn't too long after that, and he stayed with me till I left that office.
What are some of the cases you remember trying, some of the ones that stand out?
Oh, probably one of the first cases that I tried that really stands out was the guy that killed shot the 3 boys in a grocery store robbery in Springdale. And that was a nasty case. One of the boys survived, but in doing that, this guy had picked up a girl. He was an escapee from the penitentiary. We learned this all later. He picked up an old girlfriend. They come to Springdale. He leaves her at the lake out there, goes into Springdale to get some groceries. 3 young men were cleaning up the store. It was closed. He knocks on the door, they let him in, and he goes around, picks up a few items. Then he pulls a gun on them and tells them to go with him. Got all the money there wasn't much money in there. But they get in the car with him, 1 up by the driver, 2 in the back seat, thinking that, he said, I'm going to take you out in the country and turn you loose. Well, I'm not going to turn you loose here because you'll call the police and they'll catch me. He gets them out in the country, out by Sonora, pulls off into a pasture, has the 3 boys get out of the car, lays them face down on the ground. He said, now, don't move till you can't hear my car anymore. They said, okay. Well, he pulls out a gun and shoots all 3 of them in the head, laying there, and takes off. One of these boys did not die. He was shot in the head, but he managed to get down to a house and knocked on the door. The lady came to the door, and of course he was bloody. She was scared. She had him lay down on the porch, and she called the sheriff's office, and they came, got him, took him to the hospital. But we had him caught, luckily, within a few days. We were sitting in my office down by the old jail, and a state investigator for the state police, Quimby Johnson, you probably heard Quimby, he happened to be up there. And I mentioned this to Quimby, and while Quimby was sitting there in my office, now this is all luck. Quimby was sitting there, my phone rang, and this lady said, do you know where Quimby Johnson is? Quimby Johnson. I said, yes, ma'am, hang on a minute. Hand the phone to Quimby, and it was the mother of this girl that had ran off with the killer in Fordyce. So Quimby told her to calm down, give him the story, and she said, my daughter will be back here tonight to get money. She's going to get money out of her bank, and she's catching the next bus back to Des Moines, Iowa. That's where she left this guy to come and get money. And we looked at our watches and we thought, it's going to be a race, but we've got to be able to intercept that girl when she gets off that bus to see her mother so we can find out where he is. Now, this may be getting old to you, but this is quite a story. It was really luck. Quimby Johnson said, you keep her there until I get there. I'm going to try to get there before she does and meet her at the bus. I pick up the phone and call Ray Ellis, who ran the airport, Fayetteville Airport, and I said, Mr. Ellis, we need to get to Fordyce. Can you help us? I believe it was Fordyce, yeah. And he said, yeah. Said, when do you get there? And I told him. He said, the plane will be sitting on the runway warmed up when you get here. Get here as fast as you can. So me and Quimby and one more, I guess it was Bill Long, we got in that plane and took off. We got there before she did. He arrested her and put the handcuffs on her. We got back in the plane and came back. And then she broke down and took them to where this killer was in Des Moines, in Iowa.
Good story. Any others you can think of that stand out?
Well, I had one jotted down here. Carl Collins was another one that was a bad dude. There was an elderly gentleman and lady that had a little farm out on 412. And they took this guy in, sort of, because he said he was poor and gave him some work. A few days later, a workman came out to these people's place and found the old gentleman shot dead with a shotgun in the kitchen and the old lady beaten, blood everywhere. Well, again, I got up there. They'd already moved them, but we took pictures and all this. And we caught him in Little Rock. He took the pickup. This elderly lady told her that he stole our pickup, took all of our money, and Carl killed us. She wrote in blood. I still got some pictures somewhere. After he left, she took her finger, put it in a pool of blood, wrote it, "Carl killed us." So we knew we had a head start on him. And as the funny thing was with it, about 2 or 3 days later, a cousin of mine who I hadn't seen in years, grew up at Farmington, one of the Williams boys, was a policeman in Little Rock, either Little Rock or right across the river. He stopped at a Speedy Mart and happened to notice that truck and the license plate. He got on the radio, and it turned out to be this pickup the guy had stolen. He arrested him on the spot and brought him back. That was another case of just luck. And of course, he got the death penalty. Both these guys got the death penalty, but the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty about that time. So they wound up getting life without parole, and both of them died in prison. Both this guy and the guy that killed shot the 3 boys. Those 2 really stick out in my mind. And then, of course, the one that killed the ones that killed the Springdale police officer, that one was big time. That one was James Frey Renton, I believe, yeah, James Frey Renton. There was 4 of them. They had pulled a job and had robbed a clothing store in Rogers and stolen some expensive furs. That's what they specialized in. They were driving a sort of a van vehicle and had a follow car, a green car following behind them for protection. They had pulled the case off, started home, got out just south of the mall here, and the policeman from Springdale stopped and pulled them over because they had a light out on the back. Well, when he walked up to their door, they just kidnapped him, took him, put him in the vehicle with them. They all took off, both vehicles, and they found him the next morning out between here and Lake Weddington, handcuffed with his hands behind him to a tree, shot 4 times in the head. The only thing left there was this vehicle, and it had been stripped. Oh, there was a pair of climbers in there, which turned out to be very good find for us later. And that case, the police worked that for about 3 years. And finally, now this is another bit of luck, finally, Kenneth McKee at that time was associated with the police up here, and Kenneth had been a sheriff or city police in Oklahoma for quite some time. Then he was an Arkansas state policeman and was Rockefeller's private chauffeur and what have you. He got a call from Oklahoma City from the jailer there and said, "Kenneth, here's what I've got. I've got a guy in jail that says he knows every ins and outs about your murder of the police in Springdale or Fayetteville. He says, but he will not talk to anybody without assurance that he will never be disclosed. He says he swears he was not in on it, but he can tell you all." So they came to me and said, "Here's what we got. Is it worth taking a shot?" We all said, "Yeah, let's give it a try. We haven't got anything else." We go to Oklahoma City, get this guy. He tells us, what happened. He said that vehicle was gone, wasn't it? He said everything burned up. And we just happened to say, yeah, there wasn't anything left in there but a pair of old pole climbers. He said, "There's the key." He said, "Remember this. That is his method of operation. He goes to a store that he has staked out where there's good furs. He will wait till late after midnight. He was an ex-climber for a telephone company or a power company. He said he'll get those on, run up there, shut the power off, come back down, then they go rob the store, throw everything in the pickup. They failed to take those climbers out of that truck when they burned it. That was the key that really put us on to who it was. And that old man, you know, we never caught him. And he also told us another key piece. He said he has a girlfriend. This guy that you ought to be looking for has a girlfriend that lives at Salisaw. Her dad is a preacher. And he said she knows where he is. You just bet your life she knows where he is. So we put a guy on her. She fell in love with him and got a little tonguey and told us where this guy was, in Aurora, Colorado, working in a parts store. So we get a hold of the police in Aurora, Colorado. They go down, surround the building, and drag him out. But those are the three that really hot ones, and a lot of good police work, a lot of luck that went with it, and they finally one of these four guys, and that killed himself, and two wound up in the penitentiary for life, and I don't know what happened to the other one. I don't know. I didn't get to try them because before they got him back here, got him charged, I moved up to the judge's office, and I couldn't be the judge that tried them.
Talk about once you became a judge, what was that like? And then tell me about some of the cases that you remember that stand out.
It was like, what it was like was a feeling of a lot of pressure. You needed a feeling of trying to do what was right. And you couldn't be in a hurry. You had to treat everybody the same, and we never had any trouble. I had one attorney that I put in jail one time for a short period of time. That was a young man that came down from New York City or somewhere and practiced law here for a while. Nice guy. Everybody liked him. But he was just a little bit different from society here. And he was trying a case one time, and he got to closing arguments, and in his closing arguments, he'd throw in these cuss words. This is blah, blah, blah. And I called him up to the bench, and I said, now, son, you can't do that. Just knock it off. Everything will be fine. Okay, went back, and it wasn't 2 or 3 minutes to hear it one again, and I called him up. I said, that one's 3 days in jail for you. Now, I don't want to embarrass you. Just calm down. Get this case tried. You got a client out there you need to take care of. Well, one long, and before it was over, he did it again. So I didn't stop the trial at that time. I just shook my finger at him. He knew what I was doing. And when it was over, I put him in jail. He stayed there for 5 days too. When it was all over, he said, I had every bit of it coming. I said, you had it coming, or I wouldn't have given it to you. My big feeling in that was, don't get in too big a hurry. Give everybody time to get ready for these things. Don't pull any surprises. Just lay it out, let a jury try it, and live with it.
Who were the different prosecutors? I know Kim Smith, but who else were the prosecutors while you were judge that you remember?
Well, Kim was the prosecutor in a different court. There was a different court organized while I was still on the bench for another judge. And Kim went over and was a judge of that court. And I was the only judge that handled criminal cases till I retired. Now, we had a judge that handled civil cases, but no criminal cases. Now then, it's grown so much. I talked to the present prosecutor the other day, and I asked him, I said, how many deputies do you have over? He said, 19. When I first started prosecutor, I didn't have any except Kim. And we finally worked up to, I think I had 2 on the payroll when I moved on up to judge.
You mentioned several cases that you were prosecuted that really stood out. What are some of the ones that you tried that stand out, or some of the more high-profile ones maybe that people might remember?
Oh, one of them was this fella that they're trying so hard now to get out of jail. That's, what's his name? Right now they've still got him in jail, but he's the one that beat the little girl to death with a rock, a little 4 or 5 year old girl.
Once you retired from the bench, eventually you became went back to private practice of counsel. Talk about that.
After I retired, I went in with the Taylor firm, W.H. Taylor and his people. I wasn't doing a lot of active work in there, but I had an office, and I still do as far as that goes. But I tried several cases. One of the strangest ones that I filed, I hadn't been there very long, and I got a call from down in South Arkansas from an old friend of mine. Said, my wife's been arrested for murder. Could you come down and represent her? And I said, you've got a lot of lawyers between there and here. He said, no, I want you to come down. So I go down, and she had shot her husband, who was a minister. And this thing gets kind of funny, although it shouldn't be. She had hired a hitman to kill her husband. The hitman got cold feet and backed out, so she decided, I guess, that she would do it herself. It was on Sunday. He was standing in the front room, looking out the window and eating a biscuit. Now, this is all seems to be insignificant, but she comes up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head with a .38, goes right through, blows the biscuit and right out the hole in that window. Of course, down he goes, naturally. She gets in the car, and she left 2 little kids at home. She gets in the car, takes off. Well, by the time she got out of town, she could hear the sirens screaming, so she turns around and goes back and gives herself up. And of course, naturally, they arrest her. He didn't die. It was a miracle, but he did not. He'd been hurt, but he didn't die. That case rocked along. I got her a bond set and got her out of jail and began to work on the case. Made 2 or 3 trips down there. Talked to the prosecutor, talked to the judge. I knew both of them vaguely from being up here. Anyway, to make a long story short, they fell in love again. And she dismissed the charges. And that was about the end. After it was all over, they invited me over to his folks' house for dinner. We all went over and had sort of a party. But I think that was the first murder case, well, it was the only murder case I tried after that was over. But I got to having a lot of drug cases where people gotten arrested for drugs, and I've always been against those drugs, and I was having a hard time defending. I never got one that went to jail, but I said, this is enough of that, I'm through with it. But then we had some other big cases. W.H. and I there was a big case out of Lincoln. You're probably aware of it, and I cannot recall those people's names. They had a construction company on the highway that turns off Lincoln to down south. Finch had a big farm there, and they arrested them for possession of a lot of marijuana or peddling marijuana out of there. W.H. and I represented them and got a not guilty verdict on that. And I don't know how, I never was really convinced that they were guilty or that they were innocent, but they just couldn't put the case together right. And then W.H. and I represented the Coger boy that killed his girlfriend over by the golf course here in Fayetteville. He had a black girlfriend which is neither here nor there, but anyway, they were kind of living together over right next to the golf course. And they'd gotten into it something that night, and she'd gotten killed. They was fighting over a pistol. Now, I never was convinced really that he killed her or she killed herself or they got shot, but the bad part about it was he gathers up the corpse, drives to Huntsville, gets some gas, takes her clothes and puts her under a bridge an old wooden bridge going up to a farm, pours her gas all over and sets her on fire. Well, the fire didn't quite go out the first time. He has to go get another can of gas, goes back and lights her up again. That time he took out and wound up in Florida. Everybody was hunting for him, of course. And he called us, wanting to know if we'd represent him. And WH said, yeah, we represent you. But that was a tough case. But we got him out at 4 years. I don't know how.
Well, you mentioned working for WH. What's the WH and his firm like? And I know they're pretty
they're a good law firm. There's several of them. WH has got a good law firm now. There's several attorneys in there. I don't know exactly what the count is. There's probably 7 or 8 of them. And I go out and drink coffee more than anything. That's about the extent of my practice anymore. It's been a very good practice for them.
Who are some of the top attorneys in the county now?
You know, I've kind of lost track with all the attorneys now. WH and 2 or 3 of his people. John Everett, I guess, still does a little bit, and I'm not sure about the one that took his office out here when John left. I don't know. I think his wife works, didn't she? She's an attorney, I think, and I wouldn't know her if I saw her. But I've just lost contact with the new attorneys anymore, except WH and John and some of those guys.
Well, you said when you were earlier talking about the sheriffs, you said when you first started, I think Sheriff Kreider was in office from Greenland?
Yeah. He was in office.
Talk about the first sheriff you remember from Kreider to the present. What do you remember and what do you know about the sheriffs?
He was an awful good sheriff. Tiger was an awful good sheriff, had been for several years. And he had a deputy or 2 that was killed during his time, and I don't remember too much about that. One I know, and I think there were 2 of them. And he finally just hung it up. And I think the next sheriff after him was Bill Long. I'm pretty sure Bill, I know he was sheriff, and I think he was the next one. And he was sheriff for about, I don't know, 2 or 3 terms, 3 or 4 terms. Then, who came on next? Herb Marshall was next, yeah. Herb was a pretty good, Herb was a sheriff when all that deal came about, when the guy got killed and over stopping the car off and took so many years to solve it. And the sheriff we've got right now, in my opinion, is a crackerjack sheriff. I think he's doing good with what he has to do. You know, when I first started, I'd stop at the sheriff's office and probably there wasn't a criminal in there, maybe 2 or 3 at the most. Now then, Tim down here is handling 400 and 500 people in that jail at a time. Now, they're not all ours. Some of them are blowbacks from the penitentiary. They have run out of room, so they're paying our sheriff and some more sheriffs to board them. They're paying for them, but they have to keep them locked up and take care of them. But it's a big job anymore, that sheriff's office.
Talk about the different judges that you worked with who were in there when you were both prosecutor and on the bench. Who were the judges and what are they like?
Well, the only judge that was in there when I was prosecutor was Judge Cummings. He handled all the criminal cases. And I took his place when he retired. Judge Butt, for a period of time, handled the civil cases and divorces and that sort of thing. And he retired, and both of them are now deceased. Both of those were well-experienced attorneys. They had been there a long time. I think Judge Cummings was there 20 years or so, maybe a little more. Judge Butt also. I had a lot of respect for both of them, particularly Judge Butt. He was a very good judge. He knew the law, and Judge Cummings did too. But Judge Butt made no buddies at all. I mean, he walked it down the line. And Judge Cummings was good, but Judge Butt was strict, but he was good.
What can you think of maybe that I haven't asked you about? Some of the memories from the past that stick out, or maybe things you should tell me that I didn't think to ask you?
I enjoyed all of it. It was the prosecutor's job. If I had it to just pick one or the other, I would probably stick with the prosecutor's job. It didn't pay as good, but I enjoyed it. It was more solving cases, filing charges, being a witness, and getting them through court. But I enjoyed the judge's position too, but it didn't have the flair that the prosecutor's office had with it. You wasn't running all over the country picking up evidence and putting cases together, and that you had to do when you were a prosecutor.
If somebody who'd never been to Washington County said, tell me about Washington County, what's it like? What would you tell them?
I'd say Washington County is one of the best places that I have spent any time in at all. It's a fast-growing area. Man, it's I don't know how much it's doubled in population since I was a kid. I recall that Fayetteville, when I started to college, was 9,000 population in Fayetteville. Now it's 90-some thousand. And Prairie Grove, and I'm sure Lincoln. Prairie Grove is, you don't know it anymore. They bypassed it with the highway. And I used to go to Lincoln quite. Your father out there, he was a good attorney. And we had a case or two, and we'd get together over coffee when I was prosecutor and kick them around and kind of see what he'd do, what I'd do, and hope that somewhere we'd meet in the middle. And we usually did. Most of those cases can be resolved if you've got good attorneys. Now, I'm not criticizing any attorney for taking a case to trial, because sometimes you have to, but a good attorney gets the knack of pretty well knowing what the outcome will be, assuming his client has told him the truth from start to finish. He could pretty well prejudge a case. I think I tried one case, and this was after I had gotten out of either one, I guess, with your father, and it was over a guy that shot a bird dog. I don't know, you were probably a little shaver by then, but your dad represented a guy that shot my client's bird dog. And it was on a pond just north of Lincoln. And I can't remember the names. That's been a long time ago. And I remember I got a little verdict and what didn't amount to anything. And we both went down and drank our coffee and went home and hoped for better things to happen for both of them.
One last question. How would you finish this sentence? My favorite thing about Washington County is?
My favorite thing about Washington County is the diversity of population. Of course, you've got to factor the university in. It's just a good place to live. The county, I like the county better really sometimes than I like the city. The county is more relaxed. The city gets a lot more politics involved in it, particularly Fayetteville and I guess Springdale. But you've got to remember, it's been a while since I've been there. I retired in 1990. That's been 20-some years ago. 20-some years. And then after that, I continued to practice some criminal law defense work for another 5 or 6 years. So